Well, good afternoon or good evening. Welcome into another episode of Don't Call This a Podcast. This is we're kind of slim today. It's going to be a little bit different. I'm Ryan. That's Ron. You know who we are. You see us all the time. But joining us today, we have a couple special guests today, and we want to make sure, because she's pressed for time, that we do get through this portion of our interview for our podcast. But please welcome Nabila Lovelace to the program. Nabila, how are you? Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. It cut out a little bit. My fault.
Oh, my bad.
I'm doing okay. Day to day. Today was a good one. Today was a decent one for sure.
That's good. We could only go day by day these days because we are living in crazy times right now.
Exactly.
So Nabila, first tell us a bit about yourself, who you are, what do you do, if you want to go into that. Just tell us who you are.
Okay, cool. So I'll do this in, I guess, a couple of tiers, right? So there's me, who's like here on the show right now, and I'm here representing a Get Out the Vote campaign that I work with, which is under Feminist Majority Foundation, and it's a nonpartisan Get Out the Vote campaign, and I'm one of the organizers for the campaign until the election. So that's what I'm here as for the most part.
Right.
So, but then there is also me. I'm a writer, an organizer in general, and a community member, right? Like I live in Tuscaloosa. So yeah, that's me.
Okay, cool. So you mentioned feminist majority and the voter registration drives. We're seeing a lot of voter registration drives these days, but as far as your organization, is there a certain demographic you're trying to target? Who are you trying to reach out to make sure that everyone, has the right to vote in this upcoming election?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question, Ron. So really, as an org and as a team specifically, I work with the folks at Tuscaloosa and in Auburn, but our big thing is voter education, which really doesn't have a ton of a demographic. We're trying to get that out, especially, with everything going on with COVID, a lot of it has to be digital, unfortunately. We can't really do as much canvassing door to door like we normally would do, but we are doing phone banking, and we're phone banking specifically with Reclaim Your Vote, so that folks who don't know that they may have been kicked out of the registration system understand that they can vote, they are eligible, and they know what's going down. So in that way, it's intersectional and intergenerational. And FMF, as an organization, is also simultaneously trying to push trying to get folks really like from the 18 to 24-year-old graphics. And so demographics. And so a lot of it is like thinking about UA, thinking about Auburn, but also thinking about, because we are an intersectional campaign, we're also trying to think about like folks at Central who are just turning 18 to be able to try and vote, right? Like we're also trying and hoping to really, and that's why we are partnering with the library, right? In order to hope that we'll get also a ton of community folks who are trying to figure out how they can vote or trying to get registered at the drive that Ron so great as an organization, we are partnering with the Tuscaloosa Public Library to put on a voter registration drive. The 19th The 19th is one of the first big dates that's coming up. This coming Monday is the last day to register to vote. So if you want to register to vote, if that's a thing that is on your agenda, if you really want to vote this year, you want to make sure by the 19th that all of your information is updated. If you changed locations and that location has changed on your ID, you want to make sure that you have filled out what you needed to go ahead and register to vote. And you want to make sure that you are just, after that, it's all about your voting plan, right? The 19th is all for making sure that your registration is squared away. If you've moved, you got to update your address, that's really the big thing.
So you mentioned voter education. So registration is just one part.
Yes.
You actually have to cast your ballot. Of course, we're living in the crazy times of COVID. So, is your organization providing any guidance as far as those who want to vote absentee, whether it's by mail or in person?
Yes, thank you so much for that, Ron. We're actually working on getting like a cute little graphic that explains bullet point by bullet point in like a really clear way how to vote absentee in person. We understand that the pandemic has folks really feeling like, voting in person is dangerous. And it is, it's already been broadcasted by a lot of folks, but there is a high percentage in terms of a deficit of poll workers, which means that, the place that you usually cast your ballot might have longer lines, which is really voter suppression. We can get into that soon too. Those lines are voter suppression, and it's not usual. It's voter suppression, but all of that has to do with resources. All of that has to do with the fact that the people who usually work the polls are usually older folks, and older folks are more susceptible to being sorely damaged by COVID, right? And so they aren't able to work in the same manner. And so for us, our big thing is really spreading information about poll workers, spreading information about what it takes to absentee vote in person, which I'll briefly talk about real quick now. And it's very simple. Actually, you need to go to your local elections or your local elections office. There's one here in Tuscaloosa, and man, looking crazy. And so there's one here in Tuscaloosa. If you go there and you have a valid ID, which is any state recognized ID, as well as any school IDs that you might have, or even if you work for the government, those employee IDs also work. And so have your ID, you go to your local elections. It's usually by county here in Alabama office. You go there, you can simultaneously request and cast your absentee in-person ballot. So it's a lot simpler than they are putting online. And so a lot of what we're doing is trying to make really cute digital graphics that make those things into really simple information to pass along. As well as like our campaign has a thing, like our team, we've been doing a thing called Tribute Tuesdays, where we highlight organizations from now and the past that have worked toward making voting an actual egalitarian possibility and process. And so it's a lot of thinking about not only the fact that you need to register to vote and then thinking about your voter plan, right? But also thinking after voting. I introduced myself a little bit. What I didn't mention is I'm also a skeptic, right? And so in being a skeptic, I'm going to cast my ballot, but I've never believed that is the best possibility, right? Like after we vote, we have to keep doing things. We have to keep showing up for each other as a community. We have to keep working with organizations here in Tuscaloosa, like Tuscaloosa Bailout and Tuscaloosa Aid Funds, so we can really have more community resources going. And we have to challenge these folks to live up to the things that they say they're going to do, or let them know it's time to go if they not, And so
yes,
our thing is really working to not only get out the information so that it's clear and everybody can understand it and get us to voting, but also to get us after voting, because we are talking intersectionally. And we know that some people don't even really want to vote, right? Because they've seen their vote suppressed. I have friends who went in, cast their ballot, had their voter registration, everything ready, and found out months later that their ballot wasn't even cast, right? It can be a really frustrating experience putting all of your hopes into voting, especially on a presidential level, right? So the biggest thing that for me I can do, right, is keep it a buck. I don't really believe, like in those I'm necessarily casting my vote for, but I do believe in being able to hold them accountable because I cast that vote.
Right.
I cast that vote, right? And I do believe being able to ask them to show up for the demands that we will continue to have after the 3rd because I cast that vote, right?
Right. All right, so
I do want to. Oh no,
go ahead. No, go ahead, Ryan.
Circle back to a quiet or something that you stated in the very beginning that I feel like a lot of organizations don't take the time to do, and I think it's really important. And how you go after 18-year-olds who are still in high school, right? you're getting them early. It's not just the college students who've been a little bit more engaged, but it's teaching those 18-year-olds. Have you seen that really have an effect on what it is that y'all do? Have you been able to kind of maybe educate a few younger ones, or have some that are a little bit more hip to what's going on than you would have expected them to be?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Ryan. I feel like it's been hard to gauge who we've been able to really get to sign up and to like know who we're affecting with some of our educational material, because we don't always hear back from folks. And I feel like the internet can sometimes feel like a void, even if you're like trying to be concentrated. But one thing I definitely can say is that them folks is on. Before I even joined FMF, there were some young folks who are from Tuscaloosa who were really, they put together, I don't know if y'all knew about I know y'all saw the rally that happened earlier this summer in June. It was young people that led that charge, even though, it was said to be sponsored by the NAACP. They went to the sponsorship with the NAACP for more numbers. It was young people that decided they wanted to have a rally, that got the information out, that put it out and had demands, right? And they have demands. They have excellent demands. They have demands about what they want their curriculum to look like, right? They have demands about what they want their schooling to look like in terms of who is allowed in there, right? Like, so I feel like, some of the young folks who I have been able to just encounter in my life around Tuscaloosa, gratefully, just from organizing and different things like that, are absolutely tuned in and they know what they want from their elected officials and are mostly like trying to figure out how they can get it, and that's the place of like us being able to really collaborate with the younger minds, because they're the ones who are going to push us to be more progressive, right? They're the ones who are going to push us further than we realize we can be even asking for in some of these things. When they started talking about curriculum stuff, I was like, man, when I was your age, I never even thought about what it could mean to try and press the board, the Board of Education and the superintendent and them about what kinds of history we're talking about. What does it mean to be adding and thinking about Black history as being added to the curriculum was something that they were talking about as a possible demand, And I never even thought about that as being something that we could maybe ask to be a citywide instituted and added, right? And so I think, like, again and again, historically and even in present terms, I feel like the young folks who I've been able to meet have pushed my thinking in terms of what we can even be going for.
All right, Nabila. So before we get you out of here,
oh my God, time moves so fast.
Yeah, time goes so fast. Yeah, to use a bad comic book movie pun, we're in the end game. So for those wanting to either find out more about your information, your organization and their initiatives, or even volunteer if there are still opportunities for that, how can they reach out to you? How can they reach out to your organization?
Amazing. So you can find us on Instagram and Twitter at vote_UA or vote AU_vote in terms of looking for either Auburn or Tuscaloosa information. We pretty much put up the same information, except there was the Auburn registration drive was today. The Tuscaloosa registration drive is tomorrow. But yeah, we will absolutely be putting out information about Alabama voting continually. So be sure to follow us. The biggest thing that you can remember is just look up Alabama Students Vote, right? If you are worried that you can't find any information or anything, look up Alabama Students Vote and the main page will show up, and then you'll be able to find all the other like local pages, because we have a chapter here, a chapter in Troy, a chapter in Montebello, right? Wherever you at in Alabama, there's a very good chance that there's an FMF Get Out the Vote campaign running. So if you just start by looking up on Twitter or Instagram or even Facebook, Alabama Students Vote, you can start finding out some of that information.
Nabila Lovelace, thank you so much for taking some time to join us this evening. We know you're super busy, but from all of us, we appreciate the work that you're doing. It's so important. And like she said, like we've been saying all summer long, all fall long, it's not just about doing the vote. It's about the work before and afterward. And we have to really give you the props for doing the work before and afterward. So thank you so much.
Thank y'all so much. Get out and vote. And if you have any issues, be sure to look up voter protection, right? Protect Our Vote. They have a phone number. It's like 1-866-OUR-VOTE. And even on election day, if you are having trouble, give them a ring and they'll have someone help you out, like a volunteer lawyer. But gotta vote if you're into it.
All right. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank y'all for having me.
Yeah, we got to have you on again.
Yes,
Yeah,
please.
for real, for a full show. For a full
I'm
show.
with it. Listen, hit my line. I'm with it. Y'all have a great show.
All right, you too.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
All right, so we're gonna have in about 12 minutes here. Geez, I don't like that one up close. Timothy Ragland, who is the mayor of Talladega, Alabama, will be joining us. We're gonna have a conversation about the importance of municipal elections and just kind of how municipal offices work. And I think it'll be kind of a good discourse for people to learn a little bit more about how things work on a really local level. In the meantime, I think we'll just kind of sit back and let this listening to this town hall from Joe Biden and just kind of see how he's doing. I muted the stream, but let me see if I can. Is the audio coming through on your end? Oh no, because I muted it over here. Hold on.
Oh yeah.
Oh baby, this is lagging. All right, let me figure out what's going on there. But a couple things that I did want to point out here. And Ron will really highlight this as we get to the end of the episode. But sorry, I'm trying to look around my thing. But there a couple of new polls have come out this week, and we've been among many to say that just kind of ignore the polls, don't get sucked into the trap of feeling like we've got a sense of security and that nothing bad can happen. But I want to go over this Quinnipiac poll because it's really gotten to the point where it's got me shook in a positive way. And I can't bring myself to whatever. I'll figure that out later. I can't bring myself to really accept the results of it, even though everything says that I really should accept the results of it. But it's a Georgia poll. It's a Georgia Senate and a Georgia state and an Ohio poll. This was released yesterday, the 14th. It shows Biden ahead by 7 points. 7 points in Georgia and has him ahead by 1 point in Ohio. It also has John Ossoff ahead of Purdue by 6 points. And more importantly, has him over 50%, which would avoid a runoff. It also has Raphael Warnock at 41%, 9% short of avoiding a runoff over Collins and Loeffler. So, Ron, our motto here. We like to be cautiously optimistic. Can you talk about what you feel hearing those numbers from a pretty highly rated pollster?
Okay, so first we have to take into account that polls are the sample size is largely biased because think who basically think of who is being polled, like the demographics. So for those numbers to be that positive, and once again, I've said this before, my margin of error is 5. If it's less than 5, I'm not believing it. But once we creep above 5, that's when I start to rub my chin. So 7 points is interesting. And Ryan, you've been banging this drum since we started this show. Like Georgia's looking like a toss-up right now, and that will be it's going to be scary if Biden wins Georgia, and additionally, like you get like even just one of those seats, one of those Senate seats, it's going to be crazy.
I had to unmute my mic. It's I think I don't see Georgia as the tipping point, but it is the state that lets us know what's going down, right? Like there are ways that there's technically a pathway where Biden could not win Pennsylvania, but still win Georgia. Like I could see that as being a possibility. It's slim, but it's a possibility. But I think it's really interesting to see that this is starting to converge, is starting to happen. I mean, we know that Georgia's been ready to go blue, right? And we could probably argue that it went blue in 2018, right? If not for the massive amounts of voter suppression, and outright cheating by Brian Kemp's campaign. But you could argue that it's going there. And now you see this turnout, right? Like you see, I'm the same way with polls. And I think there's a really good clip from Pod Save America from Monday's show where they talk about just kind of how pollsters how pollsters conduct their polls and how they've adjusted to the mistakes they made in 2016. And we also have to remember, because there's often this narrative that people just didn't show up to vote or that people stayed home, but it was the most participated in an election in, I want to say, 50 years in terms of the votes cast. So it's not, that wasn't the case of what happened in 2016 in terms of people just not showing up for Hillary. It was that Hillary was villainized enough so that people who were in the middle, who were independent, who maybe were soft Democrats, went to Trump. So it's important that we make these distinctions and that we kind of say these things, because it puts a whole new spin on what the polls are. You can also see in the polls on how they randomly, you know, how they do their samples and everything like that. Quinnipiac tells you at the bottom exactly what they do. And it's not to say these things are 100% accurate, right? Like, you know, but even Republican pollsters like the Trafalgar Group show Biden as having the win. It's barely in their case, but it shows them as having the win. So all of these signs say I should be excited about November 3rd, but I can't let myself do it. I can't do it. And everything says that this should be, if Biden gets Georgia, he's easily got 300 and something electoral votes, right? Like, if he's got Georgia, then he's got Pennsylvania. He's got all those Rust Belt states he lost. He has Arizona, and he probably has North Carolina, right? Like, if that's what happens, and that's what we're looking at. So that to me is what is the most surprising from all of this.
I think you definitely raised some good points, and also I want to factor in something that we aren't considering, like early voting. There's like a lot of early voting going on in this country, and I think we need to consider who is choosing to vote early.
Mm-hmm.
I think things could be looking very promising, you know, once we approach that date. Of course, there are going to be shenanigans. We hear about them already. We know what's going on out in California, you know, Harris County in Texas and elsewhere. But like we've been saying on the show, the numbers, the turnout has to be so large that, you know, basically it has to be a landslide. It has to be like, there's no way you can even dispute it. Like,
I put it this way. They are cheaters, but they're not smart cheaters, right? Mm-hmm. Like, they will sabotage, but they can't do it to the efforts that it needs to be done to prevent a landslide from happening, right? Like, they can't fix a landslide because they're not smart enough to do it. They can't do it without it being obvious, right? So like, you're doing fake ballot boxes in California, and I get that it's to affect some House races, but in California,
right?
You know what I'm saying? Like, you're not going to turn that red. So, you know, you're just kind of wasting resources in that sense, but it shows you how scared they are, right? Because we talked about the Senate on here forever. We've talked about the presidential level, but there are plenty of House seats that can be flipped, as we talked about with Dana Barrett a week ago, right? Like, there are plenty of congressional seats that can still be flipped, and that can solidify a House majority in favor of the Democrats. So this is not by any means, they're scared for a reason. They're trying these tactics for a reason. And we have to make sure we finish the job, because like you said, Georgia set a record in early voters on Monday. I think we got close to the record again on Tuesday. In Harris County in Texas set a record on Monday with 200 something thousand. So it's insane numbers. All right, let's talk a little bit about, well, actually, I think they're coming back. So we're going to pop in here for a little bit, and shortly Mayor Timothy Ragland from Talladega will join us. But this is thekidsworkarounds.com. We're going to tune into this Biden town hall here and see how it's going.
Institution Center in Philadelphia. Here again, George Stephanopoulos.
And welcome back to our town hall with Joe Biden. We're going to get a question now from Cedric Humphrey. He's a student from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, progressive Democrat.
Don't jump, Cedric. You look like you're way up there.
I'll be okay. Thank you, George. And good evening, former Vice President Biden. Many people believe that the true swing demographic in this election will be Black voters under the age of 30. Not because they'll be voting for Trump, but because they won't vote at all. I myself have had this exact same conflict. So my question for you then is, besides you ain't Black, What do you have to say to young Black voters who see voting for you as further participation in a system that continually fails to protect them?
Well, I say, first of all, as my buddy John Lewis said, it's a sacred opportunity and right to vote. You can make a difference. If young Black women and men vote, you can determine the outcome of this election. Not a joke. You can do that. And the next question is, am I worthy of your vote? Can I earn your vote? And the answer is there's two things I think that I care, and I've demonstrated I care about my whole career. One is, in addition to dealing with a criminal justice system to make it fair and make it more decent, we have to be able to put Black Americans in a position to be able to gain wealth, generate wealth. And so you look at what that entails. It entails everything from early education. That's why I'm supporting making sure that we in Title I schools, as you know, schools with the least tax base to be able to support their schools. I increased the funding for them from 15 to $45 billion. That allows every teacher in that school to make up to $60,000. And the problem now is they're leaving the schools. They're not there. We're short about 1.5 million teachers, 1.25 million teachers. Number two, every 3 and 4 and 5-year-old will go to school, not daycare, school. And what all the great universities, including the one you've gone to, or went to, in fact, talks about in the last 8 years, what's happened. What happens when you let them go to school, they make up rapidly whatever shortcoming they had in terms of their education prior to that. They have not heard as many words spoken, et cetera, et cetera. What happens is that the studies show that 58% will increase by 58% their chance of going all through 12 years of school and going through successfully. We'll also provide for the ability to bring in social workers and school psychologists. We have one school psychologist in America now for every 1,507 kids. It should be 1 to 500, not just in schools that are poor, but in all schools. Because we learned that, for example, drug abuse doesn't cause mental illness. Mental illness causes drug abuse, the failure to get hold of people and deal with their anxieties. In addition to that, I provide for $70 billion for HBCUs, for them to be able to have the wherewithal to do what other universities can do, because they don't have the kind of foundational support they need. And so that would allow them, for example, like we did in our administration, the president allowed me to go down and we awarded a cybersecurity laboratory, ability to compete for a cybersecurity laboratory. The federal government spends billions of dollars a year on universities because they're the best kept secret, or where most of the major inventions come out of. And so that school now will be able to produce young Black women and men who are going to go into a field of the future that's burgeoning, cybersecurity. And that's what's going to help a great deal. In addition to that, if you're a young man about to graduate, or you graduated from school and you want to own your first home, or it's awful hard to get the money, depending on the background, your economic background is, to get a down payment. So we're going to guarantee first-term home buyers a $15,000 down payment for first-term home buyers. In addition to that, what all the studies now show, and I've been arguing this for a long time, is young Black entrepreneurs are just as successful as white entrepreneurs or anyone else given a shot. But you can't get the money. Where do you go to get the startup money? So what President Obama and I did, we had a program where we took $1.5 billion, and we invested it in all the SBAs around the country, in the state SBAs, small business associations. And that generated $30 billion came off the sideline, because if you have a guarantee of $200,000 for your new startup enterprise, young entrepreneur, you're going to be able to attract, if it's government money as a guarantee, you'll be able to attract another $100,000. It generated $30 billion. Well, I'm changing that program, and I'll get this done without much trouble, I believe, in the Congress, from $1.5 million to $30 billion to $30 billion. That'll take $300 billion off the sideline and grow, because and for example, if you, in fact, and I were the same age, and we split our differences and we were the same age, and we went to the same builder to buy us each the same home, but my home was in a white neighborhood on one side of a highway, and yours is in a Black neighborhood, same exact home. Your home will start off being valued 29% less than my home, yet your insurance for that home will be higher. You'll be taxed more for it. We've got to end this. That's what got me involved in politics in the first place, a thing called redlining. We can change so much, that we can do so much to change the circumstances to give people a real opportunity.
Cedric, did you hear what you needed?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I was just saying, do you hear what you needed to hear?
I think so.
Okay.
Well, there's a lot more. If you're going to hang around afterwards, I'll tell you more.
Okay.
Let's get
No, but I really mean it. It is the key. Look, this is the way every other, how do most, like my dad, he lost his job up in Scranton. And it took him 3 years to be able to move down to Delaware, to Claymont, Delaware, a little steel town, and send us home to our grandpa to live with him. We finally got back. We lived in apartments, became 6 and 8 housing. Much later, it wasn't. It was just normal apartments. But it took him 5 years to be able to buy a home. Well, we bought a 3-bedroom home with 4 kids and a grandpa living with us, but it accumulated wealth. You built up wealth. That's how middle-class folks make it. They build up wealth. Then he was able to borrow a little against that to be able to help us get to school, those kinds of things. It's about accumulating wealth. And you're behind an 8 ball. The vast majority of people of color are behind an 8 ball. And it's the same way what's going on now with all this money that's been voted. What's happened? You go to the bank, if you're a black businessman, and the president fired the only inspector general to oversee all this help coming from the Congress. And what happens? You go in and they say, do you have an account here? No. Do you have a credit card with this? No. Have you borrowed from us before? No. We bail these suckers out. They're not liable for any of the money, but they still won't rent it. They still won't lend it to you. We got to change that. It's about accumulating wealth.
Want to get another question in here from Angelica Politaros? No, not at all. Garnet.
All right, so we wanted to peep into that, and we may pop into it later. Or I may sit down and watch it at the end of this, whenever Ron and I finish. But we wanted to bring in our next guest for the day. I do want to kind of get back, Ron, at the end of this about how he answered that question and kind of how you felt about it. But joining us now, we are very excited to have Timothy Ragland, who is the mayor of Talladega, Alabama. How are you doing today?
Doing great. How are you guys?
Doing great. First and foremost, we're so thankful that you could join us today. We really appreciate you making time. And we wanted to bring you in for a number of reasons. But first, I kind of wanted to let you introduce yourself and tell your story about why you decided to run for mayor and how that came about.
Yeah. I was born and raised in Talladega. Graduated from high school there. Went off to the military and to college. And I came home and I was looking around in 2015. And I saw a lot of dilapidated buildings. I saw the infrastructure wasn't improving. It looked the same way it did when I left to go to college and join the military. And so in 2019, a few years later, time came around again, and I saw many other streets hadn't been improved. People weren't excited to be from Talladega. When we were in the news, it was typically for a bad reason. And so, I decided that I was going to be the change in my community that I wanted to see. I just didn't want to be a person that was going to complain about what was going on and not do everything I could to help change my city. That's home, and I felt I had an obligation to the people that live here to do everything I could to make Talladega the best it could be.
Go ahead.
Oh yeah. So I was looking at some of your interviews leading up to the election. And you always mention bringing Talladega into the future. And specifically, you mentioned infrastructure, and you also mentioned technology. So can you go a bit into that as to, I guess, your goals for making Talladega the modern American city?
Definitely. So, in our city, we have a population of just over 15,000. And the main manufacturing, or the main job source, is manufacturing. We have a Honda manufacturing company that's right out, or in another city, but it's very close. And a lot of the people that live in Talladega work there, including my parents. And so we once had a large textile industry in Talladega, and that has gone the way of the dinosaur, so to speak. It's no longer existing. And so I really think we should be looking toward the future as far as jobs are concerned. Everything is going technology. Now everything is becoming more advanced, and I think in order to stay in step and to not lose our standing as a city and to benefit the citizens more, I think we need to go toward the technology route. 43% of the city didn't have access to high-speed broadband internet when I was running for mayor. And at the time in 2019 and now 2020, that's crazy. And especially since coronavirus has hit and we have students who are going to school from home, they're doing everything online, and those students who don't have that technology access are going to be behind. I mean, that's just the nature of it. And so I feel like, we're too far into the 21st century to not have everybody with access to that technology. And so that's something we're working with the broadband providers to try to increase our capabilities there. That's something that a lot of people in the city are excited about because, like I said, I try to explain it when I'm talking to young people. I won't necessarily, I'll explain it in different terms. I would say, listen, 43% of our city can't go on PlayStation Live and play Call of Duty, or they can't play their friends on Madden, or they can't play their friends on 2K. And so then they're like, whoa, that's crazy. And I'm like, yeah, so that's what we're trying to work toward to make sure that everybody has access, because, it's 2020. That's crazy that we don't.
Yeah, I want to kind of follow up on that a little bit because I used to live in Huntsville for a little bit of time. And as you may know, and as a lot of people who are listening may know, Huntsville struck a deal with Google to get fiber laid throughout their city. Now, of course, that's a little bit of a challenge when you have a city of, a couple 100,000 compared to, 15,000. But how do you go about making those things happen? Can you talk about that process? Because I know a lot of times people don't really quite understand the way that municipalities work and how those negotiations work. So how do you even begin that process of getting that foundation laid?
It's a long, tedious journey. So the start of it is to reach out. I've reached out to Amazon and Google and Tesla. Who else? Several tech giants that I've reached out to and say, hey, listen, we have tons of land here. We have people who are able to, they work with computers now, not in the same aspect as with the tech giants, but they are able to learn the processes that need to be done. And so I say, hey, listen, we got the workforce here. We have a community college here that is ready and able to train people in the jobs that need to be trained in. We have Talladega College here, who is one of the great institutions in our state, HBCU. We have the Alabama Institute for the Deaf and Blind, who has a huge industrial complex in our city where they make things for the military and various other organizations. And so I'm reaching out to them, and hopefully, they can see that Talladega we could be a test site for drones or self-driving cars. I think we have a whole lot to offer to any tech giant, and I'm hopefully we'll hear back from some of those guys soon. But that's the first step in the process, to reach out. And then after that, of course, we have to make a very enticing package to recruit them there as far as tax incentives go and things like that. But one thing that I'm very passionate about is, if we're going to give you a tax incentive, if we're going to let you be in our city, you need to be giving something back to the community. So I always make sure that I talk about the community benefit agreements that we have with manufacturers and with other businesses that come into our city and receive those tax incentives, because you can't be taking everything out of the city and not giving anything back.
I think you raise a good point, because when you look at, like, for instance, the data center that's coming to North Alabama, I think in 2021, I think they just broke ground, the Google data center, and also Amazon and Bessemer. Yeah, so the land has to be there, but at the same time, it has to be mutually beneficial. So when you're talking to these tech giants and you're pitching Talladega as a location, what's something that they may not know about Talladega? Because we know about surrounding areas like Birmingham or Huntsville. How do you pitch Talladega to these tech giants?
Yeah, I like to say we have something to offer to everybody. We're one of the best kept secrets in Alabama, and that's something I'm working really hard to change. I don't want us to be a secret. I want everybody to know what we have to offer. But if you're into outdoors, we have Cheehaw Mountain Trails, we have racing, we have fishing, we have hunting, we have one of the largest indoor shooting target practice facilities in the country, one of the top 5 largest, I believe. We have one of the last remaining 1930s Art Deco style Main Street theaters in our historic district in downtown. We have, of course, Talladega College has almost our murals. They just opened a museum for that, and they're really beautiful to see. So we have a whole lot of stuff to offer. So if you come to Talladega, and we're close to everything, like you said, we're close to Birmingham, not very far from Atlanta. So we're kind of very well situated to have a whole lot to offer.
Well, I do want to ask you another question. I kind of want to dive a little bit more into your role. So a lot of what we do on this podcast and on this broadcast is to kind of, help people understand a little bit more about the importance of local elections. We've interviewed a lot of state candidates here in Georgia, as well as, sitting senators, Congress people, that kind of stuff. Can you talk a little about your role as mayor, just kind of the build of Talladega? So, some, of course, towns have council people, all of that kind of stuff. Can you talk about just kind of the structure of it and your role compared with the role of your colleagues?
Yeah, definitely. So we have a very interesting form of government in Talladega. We have the council manager form of government. We switched to that in 2003. So about almost 17 years now. So in that form of government, the city manager is the chief administrative officer. She handles the hiring, the day-to-day operations of the city. My role has been called ceremonial, and that was one of the focal points in the election. I felt that there was a lot more that could be done in the mayor's office than had been done by the previous mayor, and so that was something that I really kind of planned out and third-year law student, so I was able to kind of look at some of the laws around what said that I could not do versus what was left up to my discretion, I guess you could say. And so the council, we have five council members. We have 5 wards, 1 council member for each ward, and they handle the legislative stuff as far as passing ordinances and things of that nature. So a lot of what I do is advocacy. When there's a problem, whether it be we just recently switched over to a new provider for our trash pickup, and people have had some issues with that. So I'm trying to work with those people, as well as, like I said earlier, reaching out to businesses and the fiber optics community and the tech giants, and trying to recruit those people to come to the city, as well as recruiting people to come back home. That's one of the big things that I'm interested in, is getting people to move back to Talladega, because we have so many people who are out doing great things, and we want them to come home and share their wealth of knowledge with the city. But yeah, that's pretty much how we operate in Talladega. I've introduced legislation when COVID-19 struck in March. I reached out to the city manager and had her to stop all water cutoffs during during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, because we're encouraging people to wash their hands, but if they have lost their job and they can't afford to pay their water bill, then it's putting them at a disadvantage, as well as the rest of the community. I've reached out to Alabama Power and Spectrum to help keep people's power on as far as power cutoffs go. Also, we work with Spectrum to get students who don't have access to Wi-Fi, get the students access to Wi-Fi. So I've kind of been doing a whole lot of advocating and being a voice for people who a lot of times were overlooked.
So yeah, let's go back to the beginning of your journey, because I think that's very important. For those who may not know, Mayor Ragland for Talladega was not only the youngest mayor, but the first African American mayor, and that's quite the treble there. Like, that's very impressive. So you said you felt the need to run because you went back to Talladega and you saw things that were going wrong and you could possibly change. So I guess, what's your advice to someone, because we're all similar ages here, so what's your advice to someone of our age group who wants to do something but feel like they can't, or their voice isn't heard? So what's that first step of getting into the political realm?
Yeah. I think the first step would be to to examine why you want to do it. I recently listened to something on Instagram, and they talked about whether you're capable of it versus being called to it. You know, there's a lot of things that we can do and that we're good at, but that's not necessarily our calling. So the gentleman was talking about how, you know, if there's a problem that you see that, you know, it's like, that's a problem that you can move on and you're not really worried about it, but versus that's capable of it, right? Like you could do something about it, but it's not really something that's pressing on your heart, versus you see a problem and you're like, man, like you're talking about it all the time, you're thinking about it all the time, and that's something that you're called to do. And so I think you should assess why you want to do it, because, you know, you get to do TV and all that kind of stuff, but behind the scenes, there's a lot of work, there's a lot of stress, and you have to have your heart in the right place to deal with it. And then I think once you do that, you should definitely look at the landscape. Like you said, I'm the first African-American mayor. I reached out to a whole lot of folks. I went to churches, I went to cookouts, and you know, this is all pre-COVID. Went to anything that I could go and talk. I was there, knocking on doors, talking to people, and a lot of people, whether they were black or white. And mind you, I'm in Alabama. I'm in Talladega County, a county that the president won by 60% in 2016. And so I got support from both sides of the spectrum, Democrats, Republicans, everybody in between. And I think that's because I had a message that resonated with people. I was able to articulate my plan for the city, where I saw us going, where we were, and how I thought we could get there. And so that's something that I think, you know, people in our age group, we're the people that's going to have to live with the decision that our local governments make, national governments as well, but local governments are so important to our everyday lives. And so we're going to be the people that's going to be living with these decisions that are made today when we're 40, 50 and older. And so we should have a part, and we should be playing a role in the decision-making process.
Mayor Ragland, Brother Ragland, I should say.
Yes, sir.
We appreciate you and your time this afternoon. A graduate of Auburn University, Montgomery. We want to go ahead and plug that too. So shout out to AUM. But thank you so much for your time this evening. We won't keep you much longer. We know you're super busy. But how can people reach out to you? How can they continue to support the causes that you're supporting? Where can you be found?
Yeah, on all my social media handle for all platforms is Timothy L. Ragland. You can reach out to me. I'm very accessible. You can reach out to me, send me a DM. We can chat. My email is tragland, TRAGLAND @Talladega, TALLADEGA.com. Anybody that's looking to run, I'm happy to support you and lend you any advice that I can. And thank you guys for having me. It's very much a pleasure.
Well, we really appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, like we said before, there's a lot of things you could have been doing. And so we're glad you came with us tonight. We appreciate it. And you have a good one. All right.
All right. Y'all have a good one. Good night.
All right.
All right. Take care.
Mayor Timothy Ragland of Talladega, Alabama. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you to Nabila Lovelace for joining us earlier in the podcast. We won't hold y'all too much longer. We'll let y'all go here. We'll be back next week as we inch even closer to election night. I think now the official count is 19 days till the final day of election.
Oh man, yeah.
So I'll be out in the early voting lines next week here in Georgia. Ron, I'm sure you will be too. Depending on where you're listening from, please run through everything on your ballot, and make sure you know who you're voting for. So yeah, we are hopefully going to have some more guests scheduled here in the next 2 episodes before the election. We're working on them. But in the meantime, kidswearcrowns.com. Ron, anything you want to plug before we dip?
I just wanted to say I really like Biden's answer to that question. That's all. Yeah, I think he laid out the plan for, I'm gonna lean in as I say this, black wealth perfectly. So yeah, I hope people were listening to that. And I think to give him props for something else, he told the guy like, hey, after this I'm gonna find you so we can talk more. And that's not political theater. He's done that before. He's given his number to a little boy who's had problems with his speech and stuttering, and he said, hey, call me. So I think I think that's where Joe shines, and I hope he gets to show that some more, because yeah, we could talk about policy, we could talk about politics, we could talk about politicians, but like, what about the people? And I'll keep saying this over and over, like, we kind of forget in all this that Joe Biden is a likable guy, and I think he showed that there.
Yeah, I think it's a lot different than dealing with, nothing against Hillary. You know, like I think Hillary should have been president leaps and bounds. We both agree with that. We'd be dealing with a much different America if she was. But the difference between her and Joe, aside from her being a woman that's easily villainized, is that she has been in media she's been in the spotlight for the last 20, 30 years. And so because of that, a picture was already painted of her. Whereas of Joe, that picture doesn't really exist outside of the memes. So it's harder for them to paint that. They try to go with the same strategy, as you can tell, and it's not working.
It's not working at all.
So, all right, that's our show tonight. We'll catch y'all next week. We'll see y'all then. Appreciate y'all tuning in. kidswearcrowns.com. And